most people say, no, I just do this because I like it. Like I enjoy having a few drinks, or I'd like to check out on the weekend, or whatever that is. And I'm like, other people notice first, normally in the abuse stage. Now in dependence, or the dependent state, a lot of people have this awareness that says, man, this is not going the way I want it to, but they just don't have other options. And that makes me hurt for people because they don't have a way out. This is the way they've learned to cope. And now the very thing they've used to cope is running their entire life and stealing from the things that they cherish most.
I'm Angela.
And I'm Chad, and we discuss issues that couples face in everyday life. Then we set you up to have a conversation with your partner that's designed to bring you closer together.
This is the Connecting Couples podcast with the real Emhoffs. Real conversations for a real connection. All right, we're back in our series on addiction. First episode, we really kind of laid out that addiction is just a pattern of behaviors or the use of something that provides us comfort. We really want you to start kind of paying attention to what you're being comforted by, when you need comfort. And so now we're going to use this episode to break down some really specific terms, basic terms that swim around in the field of addiction. And these aren't our terms, like Chad and Angela aren't saying, here's what we feel. These are just terms in the 12-step program that we run, or in addiction work that you will hear people say. And it's important that we as a caregiver understand what they mean. And it's important that we help you, the listener, understand so we can be on the same page when we're discussing this.
Man, I've had people have huge reactions to some of these words. Even the word addiction. Sometimes people go, oh, I don't believe in addiction, or, oh, I don't believe in this or that, or I'm like, or codependence. Oh my goodness. I've had lots of people say that's just so wrong to the person who's actually the victim of addiction. And I'm like, I get what you're saying. That makes sense. And we're going to dive into definitions around them. But we do feel like language is a barrier even when it comes to understanding what we're talking about. When we say addiction, like we said last episode, we all kind of know what we're talking about, and yet we still probably don't know what we're talking about at some level when you throw the word addiction out there. And so please give us a grain of grace, or a little bit of like room with this. We're just talking about what is normally discussed and kind of commonly said in our vernacular in the world that we live in.
And this is something that Chad and I work with, and so that makes us have experience, but golly, there are tons of experts in this field. We're just people who have personally experienced a lot of this, and then who work with people who have. And so we're coming off of that experience, bringing it to you. So we want to start off with even the word addiction. So after our episode 1 definition of it, I really wanted to make a distinction between, and what we talked about was my use of like Advil and sleep aid to it becoming every night. And would I even call myself an addict? Or even the example you used. What is the line? Where does the line get drawn between I come home from work and I have a drink, or I, have never missed an episode of this television show, and if I do, I watch them all together. Help me, Chad, understand the line that shifts something from it comforts me, I might even be using it a little bit more than I'd like to now I could possibly be defined as an addict.
Well, addict, so clinically, nobody would use the term addiction. But I would say, we talk about dependence or abuse, or but in this podcast, when we're saying addiction, I would say anything that causes distress to your life, unwanted outcomes,
or relationship. I guess that's life too.
Yeah. Any so if it causes me harm, if people have noticed it and said, hey, that might be a problem for you, or if I've noticed it, or if I think, hey, I'm going to go a week without drinking, and it seems like, well, I get to Monday night and I haven't been able to not drink even Monday night. Like, it's like, if you can't stop this thing that's happening in your life, I would call that an addiction.
You might have an unhealthy dependency on it.
Yeah. And I mean, that's the thing, that there is a difference between like a dependence and abuse and then use, right? So you could break that down in 3 levels. So dependence means...
When you say clinically, I wouldn't use the word addiction. Is that what you are breaking down right now? Like clinically, instead of using addiction, they would use these 3? What are they again?
So it would be dependence, abuse, and use. So there's 3 levels to that, right? So somebody who's dependent can't go any length of time without using, right? They require it, or else they have a physical reaction. Now, people say, well, I don't have a physical reaction to Facebook. Well, maybe you do. If you go a few days without looking at it, how does your body respond? Or do you find yourself thinking about it? Or can it kind of rule your day? Or do you get angry or tense or frustrated or have like a physical reaction? Like, does it affect your mood if you're not using and I'm using Facebook.
But yeah, do you get anxious? Do you feel like you're missing out something? Are you looking for, I made a post. Did anyone comment on that post? Am I being rejected? Am I being accepted? I mean, there's a lot that goes into even that.
So I think you could think about it in that way. But when it comes to like drugs and alcohol, like if I stop, do I get sick? Right? Do I have tremors, or do I get the sweats, or do I get?
So that's even only in tier 1 dependence.
That's dependence. That's the highest level.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's the highest level. And so abuse would be something where you would do it for an unhealthy reason, right? And I think you could even classify it as something where somebody like on a weekend I binge. Right? So I use it, and then a lot of times when I end up using it, I do it more than I wanted to, or for reasons that I don't like. So if I'm like, heck, I abuse alcohol because I'm nervous when I go in public settings or at work events, so I drink more than I would like, and then I end up going home and drinking more also.
But then I don't drink for like 3 weeks because it's not a public setting, so I don't have a dependence on it, but every now and then I use it too much.
Right. So Okay. Let me think about this. So abuse isn't going to have a physical side effect. It's going to have maybe a draw, like I do it more than I want, or I kind of like. You can think about it like binging in some ways.
Okay.
Like, I start on it, and then it's like it happens more than I want.
I even want to say a long-term physical side effect, because I think, you and I are on this healthy eating, and we're going to talk about our food issues and giving up food and trying to be healthy eaters. And when I eat bad, when I've abused the food, I don't feel good. There is a physical side effect. Or even when I find myself wanting to go to bed at 10, knowing I have something early the next morning, but I have to find out what happens in this show. I can't go to bed yet. Then I'm tired. I just want to say that there are some possible physical side effects in the abuse.
Well, and I want to say that, but you got to look at it like this way. It's the flip coin.
Okay.
All right. So in abuse, you have like you're hungover the next day.
Yes.
Right. And so there is a negative outcome. So I would agree. That's why we would call it abuse. But if we're talking about dependence, if I don't use alcohol, I have a negative outcome.
Okay.
So they're just different tiers, different layers.
If I do use versus if I don't use, that's dependence. Literally, even though we have a huge outline, I am taking notes from Chad as we do. I'm like, this is good stuff. I need to write this down. I am.
Well, and that's why you'll find somebody who's dependent who says, I cannot quit. This is how I function.
Yeah.
I do this to get through life. And so, again, that's that spot where I feel really bad for people because they don't know how to do life without this thing. It is literally the thing that helps them get out of bed and do their job and function and be in relationship. They feel like alcohol, heroin, fentanyl, whatever the thing is that they're using is the thing that allows them to function and to not be sick.
Yeah.
Right? So if you're thinking about dependence, that is a level of dependence that literally the drug, drink, chemical, fantasy, whatever, it is running your life. And without it, you don't feel okay.
I think about social media. You just talked about the huge ones that obviously we would say are a struggle in someone's life, and our culture doesn't find those acceptable. But something like social media, we've discussed before that we believe that we're designed for connection, and we really are. Yeah. But the way our culture runs, we are more and more and more isolated, and COVID did not help with that.
Right.
And so social media gives us this false sense of connection, which really we're trying to satisfy our longing for connection with other humans, but it's not real connection. And so it's just an unhealthy coping strategy. So that's just continue to think about that. Okay, so dependence is the worst tier. I can't live without it.
I can't live without it. I literally have bad symptoms if I don't do the drug. My body is dependent on it.
Abuse is the next tier down, which is when I overuse it, I feel bad, but I'm not dependent on it. I can go stretches of time without it.
But when I do use it, I do it more than I want to. I overuse it. I can't seem to stop for a stretch of time. And then I kind of like realize the consequences and snap out of it. But it's like, you can think of it this way, like a dependent would use it Monday through Sunday. Abuser might use it
on the weekend,
Friday through Sunday.
Yeah.
But then to go from abuse to dependence, normally it goes, oh, I'll use it Friday. Well, I'll start on Thursday. We'll go to Thursday night margaritas or whatever the thing is. And then, you can see it kind of leading back into like, oh, well, we'll start on Wednesday. Well, we'll have lunch with somebody and have a beer or whatever. Like,
oh, it's a holiday Monday. Now it's a long weekend and here we go. Okay, and then the third tier, which is just the use of. Yeah. To be able to use social media, use food, have a drink, use pain medicine, those things that you can use and it not be bad.
I hate to say this, but I'm like, somebody who uses alcohol on a Friday night and says, okay, I'm going to have a few drinks and man, I had a couple too many. And so I feel bad the next day and I'm not going to drink for 6 months. Like that is a completely other tier. So when we're talking about use, or just has one glass of wine with dinner and doesn't finish it, that's a totally other thing when we're talking about alcohol specifically.
And that's
but
usually
it could be lots of drugs too. So I'm not
that one is not usually going to be brought up by your spouse.
Right. You're not going to have 2 or 3 friends like I did back in my 20s say, hey, you should check out AA, right? And I'm like,
you have a problem.
Have you ever looked into the 12 steps? And I'm like, yeah, I read about them one time. I think I did them. I've never worked a program, but had this thought that like, why does everybody keep telling me about this other program I should check out?
So let's talk about, again, that line that's drawn that Chad just did a great job of, kind of these 3 tiers. But what you're saying is you might know you're an addict if. You might start to consider I have a problem if someone in your life, maybe you have enough internal awareness to go, I recognize that abuser person that is abusing whatever the thing is can go, oh man, I'm watching too much TV. I'm on social media too much. I recognize that I'm eating because my clothes are too tight and I'm, clearly not doing healthy strategies and choosing unhealthy ones. You might have self-awareness and recognize, this has gotten out of hand and I want to reel it back in.
Yeah.
Or you might not have that awareness and think you're still kind of managing it fine. And that's when a partner, a loved one, a family member will maybe say what Chad is saying. Like someone goes, hey, have you considered therapy? Have you ever thought about Celebrate Recovery? Have you heard of
any program? We need some help here. Yeah. Well, I think that's the thing that's hard because I don't know anybody who was ever abusing a drug or alcohol or dependent. Actually, in dependent, sometimes there's a little more awareness, but especially in the abuse stage, most people say, no, I just do this because I like it. Like I enjoy having a few drinks or I'd like to check out on the weekend or whatever that is. And I'm like, other people notice first normally in the abuse stage. Now in dependence, I think or the dependent state. Yeah. A lot of people have this awareness that says, man, this is not going the way I want it to, but they just don't have other options. And that, again, it makes me sad. I'm like, that makes me hurt for people because they don't have a way out. This is the way they've learned to cope. And now the very thing they've used to cope is running their entire life and stealing from the things that they cherish most.
So since we talked about that dependency, that harshest tier of this process, then I think it serves us well to now bring up that word that sometimes people cringe at, which is codependency. Right. So let's talk about this for just a second. This word that was actually coined by Al-Anon, and Al-Anon is the flip side of AA, so Alcoholics Anonymous, which has been around for decades.
Long time.
Really designed for, it's 12-step program designed for people who abuse or are
dependent on
alcoholics,
alcohol.
And that's the wording that they would use. They designed a program for the loved ones of the addict because what they found was that even though the person living with the addict doesn't necessarily abuse or is dependent on the substance, that alcohol that's running my partner's life is also running my life. So I'm, trying not to set you off, trying to help you manage, trying to be your accountability partner, trying to control your behavior. It's interesting too, in the realm of pursue withdraw, and it doesn't necessarily mean only withdrawers or addicts, pursuers can't be, because pursuers can be also.
Yeah.
But around the content of the addiction, usually the pursuer role is trying to stop the addict from using
whatever the thing is.
Whatever the thing is. And the addict is the one that is going to this other thing for comfort. And so you see those same cycles play out. I've heard a quote before, show me someone that's addicted to something and I'll show you someone who really wants them not to be addicted.
That wants them to quit.
Yeah. Because they're trying to control and manage, and that is that codependent term. And so not knowing where my partner's addiction starts and stops or what my role in it is. If they can't be a healthy person, then what is my job to help them be a healthy person? And it could be I'm criticizing, I'm shaming. It could even be come alongside and say, hey, let's, maybe it's you need to go to AA or CR or you need to go to therapy, or how can we? And so we've discussed a little bit of that, but that is a term we want to bring forward, is if you are in the life of someone who is addicted or has an unhealthy behavior, there is a good chance that you already have a pattern of relational interaction that is possibly feeding that unhealthy pattern.
Yeah. Well, and
is that an okay way to word that?
Man, no matter how we say this, it sounds like the person who is the partner of the addict, I'm going to use that word, the partner of the addict is somehow a part of the problem. And so, kind of thinking about it, I'm like, this doesn't mean to say that, like, oh, you're to blame. No. By any means. Like, you're probably the one, the codependent partner is probably the one that wants more than anything for their spouse, their friend, their partner to get healthy. But at the same time, we're not able to take the extra steps, take a little more initiative, draw the lines a little bit harder that would cause that change to happen. And so,
there tends to be this idea of if you would just stop drinking, everything else would be fine. And that's not the case either. It's never just the one thing. Usually the addiction to the whatever the thing is the byproduct of a deeper problem.
I'll say it stronger than that. It always serves a function. There is never an addiction or a dependence that doesn't have some function that it's serving for whoever's using it. Now, I'm not saying that somebody who's dependent doesn't just use it so they're not sick, right? That could be the case. But most of the time, these things are born out of a need. They're born out of a place that says, I don't know what to do with, like we said the last episode, this overwhelmed, anxious thing. And so I don't know how to take it to anybody else. I don't really know how to resolve it myself. I don't know where else to go with it. So I'm going to go ahead and find something that provides some sort of relief.
I find even in this moment right now, Chad and I both wanting to offer so many disclaimers.
Yeah, I do too.
Because I want to just say this, the victim of, the partner to somebody who is addicted has probably gone through a lot. Yeah. Whether it's, being worried about your partner, to your bank account being misused, to there being all sorts of other unhealthy, things that are just involved in this. And so there is a part of us that wants to protect that victim of addiction. Yeah. And there is another part that wants to say, hey, how do we give you the resources that you need to come alongside your partner who has this? And so we'll say all the time that even as much as the addict needs a 12-step program and to find some new strategies, the partner of the addict needs to be in a recovery program, which is why Al-Anon was created to begin with, so that they can learn better strategies, better boundaries, learning how to interact, being a safe partner to allow for some of that comfort to be met. And we're going to get into that in the future episodes, but we needed to define codependency. And so to all those out there who have been told you're codependent or who are cringing at the fact that you might be who we're identifying. We want you to know we love you dearly.
Well, and let me just, for a second, let me go into that world, right? So I have a partner who's abusing alcohol on a consistent basis and maybe dependent on alcohol. And I love this partner. It's somebody that, I don't want to lose the relationship with. Mm-hmm. And so everybody tells me that I should kick him out or kick him to the curb or her, whoever, right? I need to set this boundary and be firm and don't let this happen. But at the same time, they come to me every time, and you can see the genuine desire for them to change. They have a desire to change. Your partner who's dependent on alcohol
is remorseful, is sorry,
wants to be different. They promise never again, and they've promised it 100 times, and you shouldn't believe them, and yet still, what do?
Yeah.
I mean, you're stuck also because you love the person, and this isn't who they are, and you keep seeing and hoping for that light at the end of the tunnel. I want to say that somebody who's codependent is like constantly holding the hope for the relationship.
Such a pursuer, because I feel that even we believe the very best. And I can even see in an addict, this is why I run a 12-step program and why I'm in this field, because I see that person's potential, and we're constantly trying to help that addict reach their potential. And it's so hard to get out of that cycle.
And it wouldn't be right not to help them at some level. But when we're talking about like clinical distress, right? Sometimes the only thing we can do is set a hard boundary. And I'm not saying that for anybody listening. I'm just saying, like, golly, it's so hard to be the partner of somebody who's struggling with dependence or chronic abuse of chemical or anything,
any of these
to
things.
Be honest with you.
Okay, we're going to talk about that in a future episode. Let's continue in this episode real quick with this exhaustive list that Chad and I came up with.
Exhaustive. It's probably not. But
Exhausting, actually, because I've already added 3 things as we've been talking about it. So clearly text us or email us with some more things that you think. We're just going to rattle these off. Things that could be something that becomes habitual, something that goes from use to abuse. Maybe even to dependence, but that you recognize has gotten excessive. And as you were talking about that, if I didn't use it, are there side effects? And I am addicted to coffee because I start every morning with it. And if I don't, I have headaches. It's a bad deal. And here's the thing. I'm okay with my addiction to coffee, which is also a problem. It hasn't negatively affected my life.
And I think I'm codependent because I normally make the coffee.
It's true.
Anyway.
So let's talk about, obviously we're talking about drugs. We're talking about alcohol. Right now, this is a study that I heard someone else say, so I need to probably quote the study, but the number one addiction of choice is pornography.
Yeah.
Because it heightened in 2020 when everyone got isolated in their home and they didn't really have, I guess, external other things.
Other accountability too.
Yeah.
I mean, like, you're not going to go to work and look at pornography because you get caught on their internet system or whatever. But I'm like, a lot of people sitting at home, sitting in an office by themselves, not seeing people, socially distant. You know,
so we're going to talk, there is going to be one episode just on pornography. We're going to talk about that and how that affects a relationship when we're trying to connect as couples. So that's one. You could possibly be a workaholic. Have you ever heard of that term?
Yeah.
So that basically addiction to the validation work gives you, or the escape, or the performance. There is something there that makes it really hard. I think in our lives, we talk about how excessive our schedule is, so busyness. And people have pushed back on us, like, you guys are way too busy, and we know that more than anyone does. But even us in the last year and a half, it's why we downsized and got a smaller house. It's why we're trying to, there was this idea for us that felt excessive. And so we're just pitching these to you to kind of consider. We've already mentioned social media.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm thinking exercise, books, social media,
movies,
video games, TV, Netflix. I mean, you talk about people binging on Netflix. I'm like, if that's something you every weekend you check out on Friday and just watch a movie. I mean, I literally know people that do this for the entire weekend. And I'm like that probably isn't the healthiest way to live, and so there are lots and lots and we will never have an exhaustive list to the allure of something that provides some sense of comfort. And so I want to say that these are just some of them. I mean, we're doing the best we can with that.
All of these actually come back to a different thing, which is a longing. A
Yeah.
longing we have for connection, to be accepted, to feel accepted, not only by ourselves, but we're pack animals. We've discussed this before,
Yeah.
by others, by our significant other, and how possibly our lifestyle doesn't give us an outlet for comfort around some of the harder things, whether it's that I don't want to burden my partner with it, or I don't even know how to identify it myself.
Sure.
And so I have built in these other things into my life that help my life function.
Yeah.
Coffee is one of them. Sleep aid is one of them. Exercise. I'll even say this has been on here. Somebody said before, you're a control freak. Do you use control to manage your anxiety? That is something that is used. And so as we continue in this series, we're asking you not only to just like dismiss, oh, I'm not an addict, or I'm not addicted to something, so this series isn't for me, but to start asking yourself, are any of these areas we just discussed, social media, use of electronics, television, exercise, work, busyness, obviously the more acceptable ones, eating, food issues, are any of these in your life possibly excessive?
Yeah.
Have you personally thought, or have you thought about your partner and said, hey, you work too much, or this is pursuers, have you called your partner out on excessive anything? And withdrawers, do you take on that anything's excessive?
Well, and let me say this. It's our last qualifier.
This brings
for this
us
series.
to our connect point.
But my last qualifier is all those things. I think we're not trying to put a value system on it for you, but we're saying these things that we do, if I remove them, if you think about dependence, right? Do I have a side effect physically? Does it alter my state of being? Or do I tend to overuse or abuse these things, right? We're not saying that you couldn't use alcohol.
Right.
We're not saying you couldn't use alcohol, or that you couldn't use a sleep aid, or that you can't use coffee, or you can't use social media, or you can't use all those things. Can probably be good in moderation or in the right dose. But are these things that take over your life and that you can't stop when you start? So those are some of the questions, the qualifiers that I want to put on all of these things.
And that brings us to our connect point. The connect point is designed to help you have a different conversation about how you experience your relationship.
Small adjustments lead to big change over time. Take some time to practice with us now.
So in this connect point, what we're asking you to do is consider that non-exhaustive list that we came up with and ask yourself if there is maybe something that you might teeter in the abusing or overusing or using to excess, or maybe you even say it's now become something that's so dependent, I don't know how to get it out of my life, or I don't know how to stop doing it. And if you can identify that personally for yourself, that's step one. But just in connecting couples, what we want to do is help you find connection with your partner. If you can bring it to your partner and say, hey, this is something that I recognize might be excessive in my life. Now, remember, we're not asking you to point out what your partner has in their life that's excessive, but being able to say, maybe on my end, it's control, and I'm trying to manage what I think Chad might be out of line. And if I can own my side of that cycle, that might be a benefit to our connection. Yeah. And so now it's time for you to go connect with your partner.
Thanks so much for listening to us. If you've enjoyed this podcast, one of the best things you can do for us is to share it with another couple that you think could benefit from it.
You can rate us and give us a review on your listening platform, and you can follow us on our Facebook page, The Real Emhoffs.
If you want to support our nonprofit that makes resources available for couples, you can check out the Ways to Give tab on our website, therealemhoffs.com.
We love to hear from our listeners, so feel free to message or email us with ideas you might like us to talk about, or the ways that our Connect Point conversations are impacting your relationship. Thanks again.